Good afternoon, conference, and again, welcome to Birmingham. For the last 6 years, you've heard me speak as Health Secretary, one of the more demanding jobs in the Cabinet. However, I see you've decided not to let me off the hook by giving me the small matter of Brexit to deal with as Foreign Secretary, where I support Dom Raab. Of course, in the NHS, we'd have banned all this talk of cakes, cherries, and eating them as contributory factors for obesity. But it is Brexit I want to talk about today. How we can make it work, how we will make it work, not on a wing and a prayer, but whatever the outcome of the negotiations, and what we need to do now to make that happen. But first, let me tell you about my first few moments as Foreign Secretary. In the summer, I met Madeleine Albright, who was President Clinton's Secretary of State. And she said to me, "Never forget what an honor it is to represent your country." So I want to start by thanking all of you for giving me that privilege and thanking Theresa May, our Prime Minister. The truth is, that's kind of applauding yourself and the right thing to do, but the truth is that nothing quite prepares you for the honor of being asked to be Foreign Secretary. I walked up the grand staircase, as it's called, in the Foreign Office, as you'd expect, a red carpet, and gazing down on me from the walls are the pictures of my distinguished predecessors. One of the more recent ones seemed to have forgotten to comb his blonde hair. At the time, I had just become the longest-serving Health Secretary, so I decided to look up who was the shortest-serving Foreign Secretary. It was not actually John Major, though he was only there for a short time. It was someone called Earl Temple, who was there in 1783 for just 4 days. So my first 4 days were critical. And in those 4 days, I actually met Angela Merkel. She gave me a wry German smile and said, "Congratulations, if that's the right word." I had a manly handshake with President Trump, but I soon realized that meeting world leaders abroad is peanuts compared to the diplomacy you need at home when you call your Chinese wife Japanese. I'm very lucky to have the best wife, and I'm very proud of you, darling. I also have a brilliant ministerial team, so let me introduce the band. The wise and wily Sir Alan Duncan, the sane and sage Alistair Burt, the diplomatic and energetic Mark Field, our principled defender of human rights, Tariq Ahmad, our passionate advocate for Africa, Harriet Baldwin, and my brilliant PPSs, James Cartledge and Vicky Ford. Let's give them a round of applause. Every one of them stands up for British values and British people all over the world. And one of those British people is Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe. Along with other British citizens, Nazanin has been languishing for no reason in an Iranian jail for over 2 years, agonizingly separated from her 4-year-old daughter, Gabriella, and her husband, Richard. I too have a 4-year-old daughter, and I can't imagine what that family is going through. So let me repeat today to the Iranian government what I told actually their foreign minister just last week. Like Nazanin, you too have precious families. So whatever our disagreements, for the sake of our common humanity, it's time to let her and the others come home. those predecessors, with their portraits on my wall, they helped shape our country for over 3 centuries. But this century will be shaped by something much bigger than the decisions made by any foreign secretary. Because it's going to be shaped by a decision made by the British people on the 23rd of June, 2016. Now, it's easy for others to misunderstand the Brexit vote. It was a decision to leave the European Union, but it wasn't a decision to pull up the drawbridge, to recreate the empire, or change our fundamental character as a gentle, generous, outward-looking people. In August, I visited a number of EU countries, including Latvia. I laid a wreath at the Latvian Freedom Monument. I realized that 30 years ago, that country was under Soviet occupation. Now, in a remarkable transformation, Latvia is a modern democracy, part of both NATO and the EU. And no European country did more to bring about that transformation than Britain. That wasn't us being un-European or anti-communitaire, and nor will Brexit be either. Our friends in Europe need to understand that 52% of the country aren't rabid populists trying to build Fortress Britain. We fought, as we heard from Gavin just now, we fought for peace on our continent, and none of us are ever going to turn our back on history. But nor, and I want to address our European friends directly now, nor should you turn your back on history either. At the moment, you European friends seem to think the way to keep the club together is to punish a member who leaves. Not just with economic disruption, but even by breaking up the United Kingdom with a border down the Irish Sea. Now, what happened to the confidence and ideals of the European dream? The EU was set up to protect freedom. It was the Soviet Union that stopped people leaving. And the lesson from history is clear. If you turn the EU club into a prison, the desire to get out of it won't diminish, it'll grow, and we won't be the only prisoner that will want to escape. If you reject the hand of friendship offered by our Prime Minister, you turn your back on the partnership that has given Europe more security, more freedom, more prosperity, more opportunities than ever before in our history. And a setback for the EU will become a wholly avoidable tragedy for Europe. And we understand, of course we understand, that the EU it needs to protect itself. But if the only way to deal with the UK leaving is to try to force its breakup, as someone much more distinguished than me once said, the answer is no, no, no. And I just want to say 2 more things to our friends. Punishing Britain for Brexit, this is the first one. Punishing Britain for Brexit is dealing with the symptoms of the problem and not the cause. And what is the cause? The cause is something that's happened across Europe. It's the failure of political elites in all the EU countries, including, I have to say, people like me in this country. It's our collective failure to deal with people's concerns about migration. That is the heart of the problem. And if you're worried about the EU's future, that is also the solution. And I want to say one more thing. Never, ever mistake British politeness for British weakness. If you put a country like Britain into a corner, we don't crumble, we fight. So as your friends of many years, we say very simply this: Brexit is not about whether you succeed or we succeed. Europe prospers when we both succeed, and it's time to change your approach. Staying the course when the going gets tough. I think any student of history would say that's more or less a definition of being British. But you do need to know where the course is set, what kind of country we want to be with our newfound independence. Now, in my office, there's a bust of Churchill. Just think for a moment about the international order that Churchill created. More democracies, more peace, more trade, more prosperity than ever before in history. I just want to give you one example. When I was born in 1966, half the world's population lived in extreme poverty. Now, there's actually a definition of extreme poverty. It's broadly people whose income is less than $1 a day. And that was about half the world. Now it's just 9% of the people in the world. So that incredibly successful international order is something we're all proud of, but it's starting to fray. Free trade is losing its luster, democracy in retreat, globalization, now a dirty word. At the same time, countries like Russia walk across the borders of Ukraine and Georgia as if they didn't exist, whilst their puppets in Syria use chemical weapons, the most horrific weapons you can imagine, to poison defenseless children. Now, we could, of course, leave it to others to deal with these global issues. We've got plenty of challenges of our own at home. We could be forgiven for pulling back, but that's not our way. Because Britain didn't just dream up the democratic world order. We shed blood with our friends and allies to build it, and we will always feel a special responsibility to defend it. And what we learned the hard way, what we really learned the tough way, is that you can only do that based on a position of strength. We actually learned it 80 years ago today, with an anniversary that probably we'd rather forget. 80 years ago today was when Neville Chamberlain returned from Munich with that infamous piece of white paper in his hand. He was a well-meaning man, trying his best, getting it badly wrong. No Conservative in this hall would ever make that mistake. But in fairness, nor would any Labour Prime Minister we've ever had. One of those Labour Prime Ministers, actually, to his great credit, set up NATO in 1949. But there is someone who would make that mistake. Because today's Labour Party is not the party of Attlee and Bevan, two men whose patriotism earned the lifelong respect of Winston Churchill. Today's Labour Party is run by the very extremists they spent their lives fighting. According to Jeremy Corbyn, NATO wasn't set up to keep us safe. It was set up to provoke a Cold War. Because Russia shares his anti-Western worldview, he couldn't even bring himself to condemn them for the first ever chemical weapons attack on British soil, because that's what happened in Salisbury this year. The people who did this aren't comrades, they're killers. And if And if Jeremy Corbyn won't stand up to bullies abroad, if he won't stand up even to bullies inside the Labour Party, then don't ever claim to stand up for ordinary people, because you won't. One person, of course, did stand up to Russian bullies. And I don't need to tell you who it was, because it was our Prime Minister, Theresa May. Thanks to her brave leadership, 153 Russian diplomats were expelled from 28 countries, inflicting massive damage on their spy networks. We're going to close the net on the GRU as well. Because under the Conservatives, Britain has a simple message for the Kremlin. If you try to intimidate this country, if you use chemical weapons, if you don't play by the international rules, then the price will always be too high. Last week in New York, I had dinner with perhaps the world's most experienced diplomat, Dr. Henry Kissinger. And Dr. Kissinger told me an interesting thing. He said that he was asked to write an article supporting Remain in the referendum campaign, but he refused. He said America and the world needed an independent British voice, and without Brexit, he worried there wouldn't be one. But an independent voice must be a confident voice, not blind optimism, but deep confidence rooted in the history of our nation. That means not overestimating our strengths, of course, but not underestimating them either. We may have less than 1% of the world's population, but we have the world's 5th biggest economy, the 3rd most generous development budget, the 2nd biggest military in NATO, 3 of the world's top 10 universities, more Nobel Prizes than anywhere in Europe, the world's financial center, and the world's language. But you know, the reason for our success, it goes beyond any of these things, or indeed anything tangible. It's because of a few simple ideas. Ideas that started here on this small island and went on to conquer every corner of the planet. One of those simple British ideas was free trade, a stroke of genius written into life by Adam Smith in Glasgow and exported across the seas by the Royal Navy. Another British idea was the fragile and beautiful insight that power should pass from leader to leader, not by force, but peacefully through a franchise expressing the will of the people. That was the long journey to parliamentary democracy that started with Magna Carta. Now, one of the best preserved copies of Magna Carta is in the cathedral in Salisbury. Somehow I don't think that's why Alexander Petrov and Ruslan Boshirov, those 2 famous tourists with the dodgy names, went there on the 3rd of March. And that's a great shame, because if they had, they could have taught their boss in the Kremlin a lesson or two about the dangers of absolute power. Another great British idea came from John Stuart Mill, who said, "Genius can only breathe in an atmosphere of freedom." Look how we British have used that freedom to unlock the secrets of gravity and evolution, to discover penicillin, decode DNA, pioneer the internet, to invent the NHS, which I was so privileged to steward. And why does all this matter? It matters because in a time of change, we can rightly feel confidence about the future of our country. Confidence. and confidence in our party too. Because in challenging times, it's nearly always our party, the Conservative Party, the British people turn to. Not always, in fairness, because they like us, alas, but because they trust us. They trust us to do the right thing. And one of the things they're trusting us to get right is Brexit. And that means, of course, the right trade deal. And we all know that all trade agreements involve compromise because both sides limit their freedom of maneuver, so both benefit from removing barriers. But important though trade deals are, our future actually depends far more on other things. In particular, our ambition and our hunger to succeed. And that's why I come back to confidence. Because if we are going to show the world that confident Britain, we have got to unite our country. And we've got to unite it behind a big, bold vision of what our newfound independence can mean. And that means putting our energy into what can happen, not arguing about what did happen. It means remembering a few things that only we really understand as the party of wealth creation, that for every one job affected by a trade deal, 10 jobs will be determined by new technology. Because Conservatives understand that our success will be determined not by our bureaucrats, but by our businesses. Whether we have a British Google, a British Amazon, a British BMW, whether we have not just HS2 up here to Birmingham, but HS3, HS4, whether on our phones we have not just 3G or 4G, but 5G or 6G. In short, whether the party of aspiration can build a country of ambition. And that means a post-Brexit world where we look to no one but ourselves for our success. And if we do that, we can turn a simple legal change into a catalyst for profound transformation. And of course, we have to unite the country. But we can only unite the country if we're united ourselves, in Parliament, in the government, in the cabinet. And to unite the country, that means we have to deliver not just a true Brexit for the 52%, but also a generous Brexit for the 48%. They are patriots too. So however fierce the debate, however high the passions, let us never forget that disunity and division won't give us a better Brexit, but it may give us the wrong Brexit. It may give us a Corbyn Brexit. It may give us no Brexit at all. So let's argue our corners this week in Birmingham. But let's not carry on the fight after the moment we needed to come together. Let's remember in our great British history, the right thing has often happened, but it never happened by accident. It happened when brave leaders took principled decisions. It happened when our talents come together. It happens when we draw on the strengths of our past to chart a route to the future. Let me say that again. It happens when we draw on the strengths of our past to chart a route to the future, because that is the essence of conservatism. So conference, let's find the common purpose and sense of destiny we need in this great, great endeavour as a party, as a people, as a nation. Let's bring others together as we come together ourselves, and once again show the doubters, show the skeptics, show the world the true potential of this remarkable nation. Thank you.